After doing my greatest RTS list of all time, I had a little moment of clarity. While we were all busy arguing about the classics, and yes, many of you proudly defended some of my favourites back at me in the comments, there was a whole host of RTS games that just don't get remembered enough, despite being an absolute blast to play. Some were brilliant, some were a little bit bizarre, but all of them deserve to be remembered a bit better. So today we're digging up 20 RTS games that quietly slipped through the cracks of time and might just be worth revisiting. Hello everyone, my name is Tom and this is LT Gaming, where we take a slower and more thoughtful stroll through the strategy genre and occasionally wander off, like today, into some dusty corners. If you're after the big hitters, Age of Empires, StarCraft, Homeworld, Supreme Commander, they're all in my greatest RTS video I made recently. And judging by the comments, many of you had very strong feelings about those placements, but go check it out anyway. Today is a different journey. Today is about the oddballs, the cult classics, the magazine demo disc wonders, the games you played endlessly one summer and then probably forgot they existed. And just to say up front, this isn't a comprehensive list. With only 20 spots, a few brilliant games inevitably had to fall off the edge. So let me know in the comments which your favourite forgotten RTS games are, what you would have included. Your deep cuts will always end up expanding my backlog to feature in the future. And if you do enjoy this kind of strategy archaeology, do drop a like, it helps immensely, and feel free to subscribe if you feel I've earned it. Alright, into the list now. Right, we're going to kick off with a proper gem, Conquest Frontier Wars, a space RTS that quietly solved logistics years before the genre even realised it needed them. Released back in 2001, it landed in this strange experimental window after Homeworld, where everyone was trying something new, and Conquest's big idea was brilliant. Your fleets actually needed supplies, fuel, ammunition, the works. Forgot your supply ships, and your glorious armada suddenly became a flock of very expensive space potatoes. And then there were wormhole lanes. They weren't flashy sci-fi tunnels. They created natural fronts across multiple star systems. You didn't just have to win the battle, you had to hold a galactic motorway with logistics duct taped together behind you. The factions had cool personality too, especially the Mantis, they were my favourite. Why don't people talk about this one more? Well, I think it was mostly timing. It was launched in the shadow of bigger RTS names, and the marketing wasn't exactly stellar, excuse the pun there, and the sequels that were planned never arrived. So it just slipped out of the conversation. You can play it on GOG and it runs very nicely, and I think it still feels fantastic. Next up is Kohan Immortal Sovereigns, along with the sequel, a game that RTS fans really adore when they remember them, and the first Kohan in particular was praised for doing something very different. Instead of building individual units, you commanded company-based formations. Fixed roles, morale, proper battlefield behaviour. It lent to this real military feel rather than click speed. Economy was very clever. You had an elegant income upkeep model that forced you to think long term, that rather than just hoard your resources. Bit of grand strategy stitched into its RTS structure, and it worked very well. It sold okay, strong reviews, a loyal community, and enough traction to earn that sequel, but it never broke into mainstream RTS consciousness. It was a systems driven game in a period when flashy cinematics and big franchises dominated the spotlight. You can pick them up on different platforms, so if you want a bit of brains and cohesion and a different rhythm, this one is an absolute forgotten gem. Next up is Seven Kingdoms, a game that in fairness looked like a fairly ordinary late 90s RTS until you realised it was secretly doing about 12 things that no one else even dared to try at the time. Instead of the usual wood, gold, food routine, Seven Kingdoms built its entire strategy layer around people, cultures with their own loyalties, towns that could revolt or defect, merchants trading across borders, and spies who could quietly dismantle an enemy kingdom from the inside. So it wasn't just armies, you managed a living society. You could win wars through diplomacy, subterfuge, or simply convincing your neighbour's population that you were a better boss than the person currently in charge. A lovely display of some soft power. And it was properly ambitious, maybe a little bit too subtle for its time though. Flashier RTS giants dominated the headlines, and Seven Kingdoms quietly slipped into cult classic territory. Go back to it today, the Steam and GOG versions run pretty well, and it still feels fresh and smart. Sliding into the list next is Tzar Burden of the Crown, one of those games you'd spot on a bargain shelf CD in the early 2000s, assume it was some kind of knockoff medieval strategy, and then discover it was actually quite brilliant. Tzar's big hook was its branching tech paths. Instead of a fixed faction identity, you chose between religion, alchemy or magic, and each one completely reshaped your entire army. If you went down the magic route, it was wizards, fireballs and summon creatures. Alchemy would give you mechanical contraptions and explosive toys, and religion brought knights, clerics and all the holy fire you could ever want. With 3 very different styles all inside the one game. It also had a pretty beefy campaign, a lot of cutscenes and a lot more missions than you would think. So why was it forgotten? Well, it launched in an era packed with RTS heavyweights, and it didn't have the flashy pedigree to compete. The visuals aged quite quickly, and its smartest ideas were tucked just deep enough that lots of players never fully saw what made it special. But jump back into it today through Steam, and those branching tech systems still hold up brilliantly. It's got a lot of charm, it's fast paced, and a real personality to boot. Now next up we got a proper throwback, Populous. And yes, you got me, it's technically a god game rather than a classic RTS, but honestly it laid down so many of the foundations the genre would build on, it deserves a place here. So long before we were micromanaging villagers or worrying about resource lines, Populous was already letting you shape the world, guide your followers and pick fights with rival deities. The big idea was beautifully simple. Instead of commanding armies directly, you manipulated the land around, flattening it for your people to grow, raising mountains to slow invaders. And if you were feeling a little bit spicy, you could drop a volcano on someone's unsuspecting village. It was wonderfully experimental energy. There were no barracks or spamming units, you were steering belief, bending nature and watching your civilization rise or crumble based upon how you shaped everything around them. So why doesn't it get talked about more today? Well, it is old, it's properly old, and its ideas have been absorbed and polished by decades of strategy games since. A lot of players simply didn't realise how influential it was. Next up we have the Earth Trilogy, 2140, 2150, 2160, and it's a series that never quite hit mainstream status, but quietly pushed RTS design in ways most people do forget. Earth 2150 for me was the standout, fully 3D RTS where terrain mattered in your fighting. You could tunnel underground, use elevation for flanks and pull off tactics you simply couldn't do in most games of the time. It also let you build up your own units from the ground up. Chassis, weapons, propulsion, proper Franken tank engineering. You had distinct factions, 3 of them, and a campaign running on doomsday clock as the planet was cooked. It was ambitious, tense and I think very ahead of its time. It's forgotten because, again, mostly timing. It was sat in the shadow of bigger RTS names, and the later entries didn't quite keep the momentum going. But all 3 games are available on Steam and GOG, and it feels very fresh and fun even today. Next up is Warlords Battlecry 3, a brilliant slice of RTS fantasy chaos that decided heroes shouldn't just exist, they should run the entire show. So instead of faceless commanders, you have persistent, fully customizable heroes who leveled up, collected gear, carried their abilities across missions. Sounds pretty familiar, right? Combine that with 14 factions, everything from dwarves and elves to minotaurs and demonic hordes. You got an RTS that felt closer to a full RPG stitched onto a strategy game. Battles were messy, magical and wonderfully unpredictable. It is forgotten because again it landed in a crowded era and it never had the polish of the giants. Its rough edges scared off some players who didn't know how deep the systems actually went. It's still on Steam, it runs quite well, and once you settle into the hero progression and faction variety, it becomes one of the most charming, replayable fantasy RTS games ever made. Next up is Metal Fatigue, an RTS that took one look at the genre's flat battlefields and say, nope, let's take 3 of them instead. Surface, underground and orbit, all active at the same time, all tactically meaningful, and it made every match you played feel like juggling 3 different wars at once. It had the combots in it, I don't want to mispronounce that. These were fully customizable mechs that you could build part by part and even upgrade mid-battle, ripping limbs off your defeated enemies. Proper robot looting, messy, creative and strangely satisfying. It's not talked about more because again it's this competitive era of RTS, but its visuals did age fast and the multiplayer scene never took off and it slipped into cult territory. You can buy it on Steam, it runs okay, and the 3-layer battlefield is still one of the coolest RTS ideas ever attempted. Right, one with fond memories for me now, Zed, one of the loudest, fastest and wonderfully chaotic RTS games of the 90s. No economy, no harvesting, you just captured sectors and those sectors pumped out units, simple, brutal and absolutely frantic. The robots were pure personality too, loud, sweary, chain-smoking maniacs who trash-talked you mid-battle. It had an attitude most modern RTS games don't even attempt. This was one Luke and I were obsessed with as kids. We'd sneak into the local computer shop, fire it up on a demo PC and try to play as much as possible before getting kicked out. Some proper childhood memories there. It was so different from the other base building RTS that many players just didn't know what to make of it, and it sadly has been quite forgotten. The Steam version, I had a lot of fun with it. It's fast, scrappy and a personality packed gem. Next up is Warrior Kings. This was a medieval RTS that looked fairly standard until you realised it had some properly cool ideas under the hood. The big one was its 3-path alignment system, Pagan, Imperial or Renaissance, and whichever direction you chose completely reshaped your army and the kind of warfare you would end up fighting. Battles were huge, terrain had an impact, and there was for me a hint of early Total War here, with morale and positioning making a big difference in battles. Campaign had scope too, and it let you define the identity of your faction as you went. It actually sold pretty respectably for the time, enough to justify some sequels, but not well enough to break into the big leagues. This was an era dominated by juggernauts, and Warrior Kings became one of those solid mid-tier successes that then faded instead of growing into a well-known franchise. It's on Steam and GOG now, and it still holds up. Next up is Armies of Exigo, a fantasy RTS that took the classic formula and then gave it a brilliant twist with its 2-layer battlefield. You fought on the surface while enemies burrowed underneath, staging ambushes from tunnels like some sort of medieval ninja, and it added a lovely bit of paranoia to every match. On top of that, Exigo delivered a confident mix of big battles, flashy spells and 3 nicely distinct factions. And it wore its inspirations proudly, but it had enough personality to stand on its own. Performance wise it did alright, it wasn't a breakout success, but respectable enough that people who played it rated it. Problem wasn't poor reception, it just didn't quite have the glitz and glamour of other franchises, and it had no staying power to keep itself in the spotlight, one of those good game wrong moment situations. The Steam version makes it easy to play, and the above-below battlefield design is still fresh. Next up is Heroes of Annihilated Empires, a really wonderfully odd RTS RPG hybrid that never quite decided what it wanted to be, and somehow that's what made me very interested in it. You had your armies, sure, but you also had a full-blown hero with loot, spells, XP, the works. Probably sounds familiar, and you commanded hundreds of units at the same time. For me it felt like I was some sort of action RPG protagonist, and it just led to brilliant chaos. Huge battles, silly amounts of magic flying everywhere, and a storyline bizarre enough to be charming. To be fair, it performed pretty well at the time, enough to kick off what was meant to be a full trilogy, complete tie-in novels. The ambition here was enormous, but the project never took off. Later episodes were cancelled and the studio shifted focus, and the first game ended up as this cult curiosity rather than the foundation of this big new franchise. If any of this tickles your fancy, pick up the Steam version. I still think it's a genuinely fun one to revisit. A bit of a legendary one for me, Nexus the Jupiter Incident. Tactical space RTS that had no care for base building or resource spamming. Instead, you handled a small fleet of beautifully detailed capital ships, and it asked you to fight battles like a naval commander in space. Firing arcs, subsystems, maneuver, they all mattered. Slow, deliberate and incredibly cinematic. For 2004, I felt it looked phenomenal. Some of those lighting effects still hold up today, and I still fire it up today. And the missions felt like episodes lost from the Expanse series that never quite got made. Escort runs, ambushes, stealth insertions, everything was handcrafted and it was full of flair. Commercially, Nexus did okay, not a blockbuster, but respectable enough to build a loyal fan base. The issue wasn't reception, it was just simply too niche for the broader RTS audience at the time. Go back to it now, it's still super stylish and satisfyingly tactical. Next up is KKND, or Crush, Kill and Destroy, an RTS that basically turned post-apocalypse into a high-octane cartoon. Mad Max vibes everywhere, mutants, scavengers, ridiculous war machines held together by rust and prayer. Subtle it was not. Gameplay wise it was pure 90s chaos, fast, loud and constantly exploding. 2 factions smashing into each other with this improvised tech and a sense of humour that only the mid-90s could produce. It had the attitude. In terms of performance, KKND actually did pretty well, especially in Europe and Australia where it built up a proper following. Enough to earn a sequel anyway called Crossfire, and that sold decently, but it never reached a level where it could stand shoulder to shoulder with the other giants of the genre. And then inevitably the RTS landscape shifted towards more polished and cinematic games, and KKND fell off the radar. If you ever want to try something wild and wonderfully scrappy, KKND still delivers. On to Dark Reign, the Future of War. I think this is one of the most forward-thinking RTS games of the 90s, and I consider it for the greatest RTS list too. The game for me had genuinely impressive AI tools, patrols, reconnaissance patterns, conditional orders. It was the kind of granular unit behavior that didn't show up for years in mainstream RTS, and unlike most other 90s games, Dark Reign's units actually behaved when it came to pathfinding. It also gave terrain the proper treatment, high ground mattered, water mattered, and maps demanded positioning from you instead of just dragging your blob across the screen. And here's the thing, Dark Reign sold well. It had a strong launch, reviewed positively, and built enough momentum to receive an expansion and eventual sequel. But it never developed a long-term identity like the genre's big IPs. Once the RTS boom moved on, Dark Reign slipped out of the spotlight and to that strange, yes it was great but we don't really talk about it anymore category. Revisit it today on Steam and it's still striking how modern some of its mechanics feel. Moving on to Ground Control now, a game that stripped RTS back to tactics and came out looking surprisingly slick for the year 2000. No bases, no harvesting, just squads of infantry, armour and artillery, each with their own stances and special abilities. Losing your veterans actually hurt in this one, because you just couldn't crank out 10 more from a barracks. What really made Ground Control shine though was its presentation. You had sweeping camera angles, detailed landscapes, and a cinematic feel long before RTS games were even trying this. In terms of performance, it did respectably well, good reviews, solid sales, and enough momentum for a sequel. It was sat somewhere between tactics and traditional RTS, and it never fully captured either audience. If you like your RTS tight and tactical, Ground Control is absolutely worth a revisit. Next up is Black and White, and yes, I'm stretching the RTS definition again, but I absolutely love this game, so it's going in. You played a literal god shaping land, guiding villagers, and raising a giant creature who could be a saint or a complete menace, depending on how experimental and mischievous you were feeling. The creature learning system was years ahead of its time. Teach your pet to farm, cast spells, or lob rocks, or villagers. It was like half strategy, half parenting, and the world reacted to your choices in a way that made it feel very alive. Commercially, Black and White was a huge hit. Huge hype, huge sales, and tons of critical attention. But the sequel never quite captured the same spark. Sadly, the series never recovered from that stumble, and the novelty faded, and the third game never arrived, and the god game genre bloody went with it. It's so awkward to find today, it really adds into this forgotten vibe that I'm getting for, but I'm still quietly hoping for Black and White 3 one day. Lords of the Realm now, a proper classic medieval strategy, and it gets talked about pretty much never. It blended turn-based kingdom management with real-time battles, long before that approach became popular. So juggling your crops, livestock, taxes, and the general misery of your peasants. And when a battle kicked off, you dropped into these real-time clashes that, while not flashy, gave the whole experience a lovely sense of scale and continuity. I think the sequel refined everything, and that's the version I and most people remember fondly. Sales were pretty strong, especially in Europe and the US, and it built a very loyal following, and successful enough to carry it on for several entries. But once games like Total War arrived, all their pomp and spectacle and larger production values, Lords of the Realm lost its place in the spotlight. Original War, a game where every unit was a named character with skills, personality traits, and a single precious life. So no endless production lines. If someone died, that was it. Suddenly every skirmish you were in felt tense, and decisions had some weight behind them. Vehicles were clever too. Instead of magically spawning, you actually stuck people inside them, so a bad driver meant a bad tank, and a brilliant engineer could turn improvised scrap into a death machine. So part RTS, part tactics, bit of HR management in there as well. Original War did modestly well. It was not a blockbuster, but it definitely built a dedicated player base, especially in parts of Eastern Europe. But it was such an odd fit for mainstream RTS audiences that it never really got beyond that cult status. Too tactical for base builders, too story heavy for multiplayer fans, and too weird for publishers that want to push too hard. Twist is, it still has an active community patching and maintaining it on Steam. Once you find its rhythm, it's a really unique RTS experience. Next on the list we have Warzone 2100, a game that looked fairly unassuming in '99 but was absolutely miles ahead of its time. Instead of handling your preset units, Warzone let you design your own, mixing chassis, propulsion and weapon systems to create everything from speedy little laser cars to lumbering artillery platforms. It also had a massive tech tree, proper sensor-based warfare, and some of the earliest attempts at giving us units that had semi-intelligent battlefield behaviours. It felt closer to a proto-Supreme Commander than a Command & Conquer clone. It faded because 1999 was an absurdly big year for RTS, and Warzone didn't have the marketing muscle to stand out. It sold well, but then the spotlight quickly moved on and gamers' memories faded. The good news now is it is open source. The community has kept working on it and it's still one of the most forward-thinking RTS designs of its era.